We're not in a quorum? Madam President?
Senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-769 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S-769, a bill to amend Title 36 United States Code, and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure. Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Oh, President,
Senator from Rhode Island.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of S Resolution 206, 223, and 226, that the Senate proceed to an en bloc consideration of the following Senate resolutions. S Reg 206, Veterans Get Outside Day. S Res 223, National Public Works Week. S Res 226, Kids to Parks Day. And S Res 229, National Brain Tumor Awareness Month.
Is there an objection? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the resolutions en bloc.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, then that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. You want to go?
Senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I rise and join my colleague, Senator Warren, to discuss the unprecedented political hold the senator from Alabama has placed on 221 general and flag officers. This hold is now into its fourth month and is beginning to have serious impacts on our military personnel and their families. Commanders who were supposed to retire or move on to a new assignment cannot do so because there is no one to replace them. Commanders who are set to take new assignments remain in limbo. Family members don't know when they're going to move. Children don't know what new school they will attend or when. Thousands of lives are being disrupted, all because the senator from Alabama has chosen to block merit-based, non-political military promotions over a policy he does not like. I would like to address a few of the assertions raised by the senator from Alabama that he has used to justify his unprecedented and damaging hold on military promotions. First, on the Hyde Amendment and the prohibitions on federal funding for abortions, the senator asserts that the Department of Defense does not have the authority to provide travel benefits and grant leave for reproductive health care not covered by TRICARE, and he is in error. Let's provide some clarity on terms. The so-called Hyde Amendment does not apply to the Department of Defense. Instead, the department has its own statute that restricts the use of Department of Defense funding to perform abortions and restricts the use of the Department of Defense medical facilities to perform an abortion, except when the life of the mother is endangered or in cases of rape or incest. No reasonable interpretation of the department's policy can conclude that it authorizes the department to pay for the performance of abortions unless, under those conditions I mentioned, the life of the mother is endangered or in cases of rape or incest. Those costs for such abortions that are not covered under DOD law will continue to be borne as they are today by service members and dependents out of pocket. That does not change. The department's policy is legal and rooted in long-standing Department of Justice interpretation of the Hyde Amendment and similar restrictions. In fact, the Department of Defense General Counsel requested the Justice Department's views on the policy last fall. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel issued a lengthy and informative slip opinion concluding that 10 United States Code Section 1093 does not bar the department from using appropriate funds to pay for service members and their dependents to travel to obtain abortions that the department cannot fund directly. The opinion, which I encourage all my colleagues to read, traces the legislative history of the Hyde Amendment, similar Hyde-like restrictions, and the specific restriction applicable to the department codified in Section 1093. And, Mr. President, I ask that the October 2022 Justice Department slip opinion considering the Department of Defense policy be entered into the record.
Without objection.
The Justice Department's opinion on the Defense Department's policy is not new and is not partisan. In fact, it relies on decades of executive branch interpretation of the Hyde Amendment through administrations of both parties. In 1981, for example, the Justice Department considered what is described as identical language restricting the Peace Corps' use of federal funds to, quote, perform abortions. In that opinion, President Reagan's Justice Department concluded that the language does not prohibit the use of funds to pay expenses such as a per diem or travel expenses that are incidental to the abortion. That opinion was authored by Ted Olson, then the Assistant Attorney General and the future Solicitor General of the United States under President George W. Bush. I ask that the 1981 Justice Department opinion on the Peace Corps policy be entered into the record.
Without objection.
The Justice Department has likewise considered and concluded that the Hyde Amendment does not prevent the Bureau of Prisons from providing transportation services for inmates to receive abortion care outside the federal prison system, noting that the Bureau has long provided such benefits. Authority to provide transportation benefits dates at least to the 1996 version of Bureau regulations and continues uninterrupted to the present day. So again, this assertion that the department's policy contravenes some long-held principle is wrong and contrary to fact. Second, on the matter of travel authorities, the Defense Department possesses broad statutory authority to provide travel and transportation benefits for service members and dependents, and empowers the Secretary of Defense to define those parameters by regulation. As the Justice Department noted, 37 United States Code Section 452 authorizes the Secretary to provide, quote, actual and necessary expenses of travel and transportation for or in connection with any travel as authorized or ordered by the administrating secretary. Further, the Justice Department aptly noted that 37 U.S. Code Sections 452 and 453 authorize travel benefits for service members and dependents in connection with, quote, unusual, hardship, or emergency circumstances, and leaves the definition of those terms and other implementing guidance to the Secretary. And I remind my colleagues again that never before in our history has a fundamental health care right been denied to service members by a single decision on a single day by the Supreme Court. No matter what side of the abortion debate you're on, you cannot deny that many women considered a fundamental constitutionally protected right for 50 years was eliminated by the stroke of a pen, and that those who depend on these rights now find themselves assigned to locations through no choice of their own, where these services are no longer available in any meaningful way. In my view, this meets any definition of unusual hardship or emergency circumstances. The Defense Department policy is a result, as I suggested, of the Dobbs decision, which places extraordinary hardships on servicewomen and dependents, resulting in military personnel no longer being treated equitably at every military base. The Defense Department's policy seeks to provide a level playing field so that a woman's health is not based on her assignment and such access is consistent throughout the force. It seeks further to ensure that these issues not become determinant in a woman's decision to join the military or remain in the military. The United States government has provided transportation and other incidental benefits and support relative to health care not covered by government programs, including abortion, to certain populations for decades. Service members and their dependents are, I believe, uniquely affected by the Dobbs decision and deserve at least that same level of support. Lastly, the senator from Alabama has stated that these officers whose promotions he is holding will receive back pay is simply not true. The Department of Defense confirmed for the Armed Services Committee this week that there is no back pay mechanism for these officers. Their date of rank is the date of their appointment, which for general and flag officers can only occur after Senate confirmation. There will be no back pay. I want to state again what I've stated before. It is deeply detrimental to our national security and harmful to the well-being of military families to delay the promotions of senior military leaders for political purposes, or any purpose really, unrelated to an officer's qualifications. It is contrary to the practice and traditions of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate. It does a great disservice to the men and women in uniform and their families. And I would ask that the senator from Alabama release his hold immediately before more damage is done. I yield.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I want to thank the senator from Rhode Island for his leadership. He has worked hard to make sure the Senate Armed Services Committee works in a bipartisan manner to keep our country safe. His steadfast approach has rightfully earned him respect from our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I appreciate his being here tonight on this issue. Mr. President, several weeks ago, I came down to the Senate floor to ask the senator from Alabama to reconsider his unprecedented action of blocking hundreds of promotions earned by our men and women in uniform. He refused, so I am here to ask again. As I said the last time I spoke about this, most people are aware that the Senate votes on nominees appointed by the president to occupy top roles in government, cabinet secretaries, judges, ambassadors. Less well known is the fact that the Senate must also vote to approve thousands of military promotions each year. If a colonel has done really well on the job, and their services promotion board decides that they are ready to be a brigadier general, the Senate must vote to approve this promotion before it can go through. Typically, this vote is a formality. These promotions are processed in big batches rather than one at a time, and they nearly always happen without taking a recorded vote. But right now, the senator from Alabama, all by himself, is blocking every single senior military nomination and promotion from moving forward. This means that one senator is personally standing in the way of the promotions for 221 of our top-level military leaders, holding up pay raises for 221 men and women in uniform, blocking 221 senior military leaders from taking their posts, and jeopardizing America's national security. In April, I sent a letter to Defense Secretary Austin asking about the impact of holding up these military promotions. Now, Secretary Austin didn't pull any punches. He said, quote, "The longer that this hold persists, the greater the risk the U.S. military runs in every theater, every domain, and every service." He went on to point out that these unprecedented and unnecessary holds are creating, quote, "rising disquiet from our allies and partners at a moment when our competitors and adversaries are watching." There is bipartisan opposition to the senator from Alabama's actions. Thanks to Chairman Reed, 7 former defense secretaries, including ones who served under President Trump and President George W. Bush, sent a letter stating that leaving senior positions, quote, "in doubt at a time of enormous geopolitical uncertainty sends the wrong message to our adversaries and could weaken our deterrence. The senator from Alabama hurts active duty military. He also hurts their families. In this letter describing the consequences of the senator from Alabama's hold, Secretary Austin noted that it places a, quote, unconscionable burden on families that are already making significant sacrifices. There are mounting worries that the negative impact on military families is threatening our military's ability to retain leaders who have completed thorough, months-long reviews to earn those promotions. At a recent Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, the Secretary of the Air Force said, quote, "One of the things that motivates our people in terms of retention is how they feel that their families are being treated." He said that he also knows that these families do not want to be treated like the senator from Alabama's political football. The senator from Alabama is punishing 221 dedicated men and women who serve in our military because he disagrees with one of the Pentagon's policy decisions. He is opposed to a Department of Defense policy established to help members of the military and their families access health care, specifically reproductive health care. Now, I strongly support this particular policy, but it's no secret that I disagree with a lot of other policy positions at the Pentagon. And as I reminded the senator from Alabama the last time we had this discussion on the Senate floor, as senators, we have many tools that we can use to shape and influence government policies without putting our national defense at risk. We can pass laws. We can conduct oversight. We can meet with administration officials. We can hold hearings. From time to time, senators object to an individual nomination, usually to express opposition either to the nominee or to ensure that the senator gets answers from a federal agency. I've done this in the past, as have many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. That is not the approach the senator from Alabama has taken. Instead, he is blocking every single top military leader from advancing indefinitely. The last time I came to the floor, he was holding up 184 nominees. Now he has snared 221 top-level service members who are currently slated for advancement. He has stopped every one of them dead in their tracks. The senator from Alabama is single-handedly holding up 3 4-star commanders, 35 3-star commanders, multiple Silver Star and Purple Heart recipients, the next commander of our 5th Fleet in the Middle East, the next commander of the 7th Fleet in the Pacific, the Navy's air and surface warfare commanders. And as a preview of coming events, the senator from Alabama has already promised to block the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The senator from Alabama has already held some of these nominees for as long as 3 months. That's 3 months that they won't have time in their next role. That's 3 months that they won't get a pay bump, and there's no retroactive pay here. That's 3 months that they don't get the experience and the responsibilities of their new duty stations. That's 3 months, and there is no end in sight. How many blows to their military careers and to their families do these men and women have to suffer before some of them simply walk away? This isn't right. The senator from Alabama has not raised any objections to the process by which these men and women were vetted and nominated. Each of these nominees has undergone a thorough review, first by their military service, and then the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Months after that review, their nomination is sent to the White House for additional scrutiny. and then to Congress to officially authorize the promotion. These are our military's best leaders. They have proven themselves to the highest degree. And as a reward for their service and their exemplary dedication, the senator from Alabama holds them hostage with no concern for what it means to their careers, the service members depending on them for leadership, or their families. The senator from Alabama's actions are not just the usual back and forth in Washington. His holds pose a grave threat to our national security and our military readiness. They actively hurt our ability to respond quickly to threats around the world. That is not my conclusion. That is the conclusion of the Secretary of Defense. When I tried to move these nominations forward the last time, I said I was concerned about how the actions of the senator from Alabama were undermining military readiness. The senator responded that he knew that I had sent a letter to Secretary Austin to ask him about the impact of the holds on military readiness, but that the secretary had not yet responded. The senator said the last time we were on the floor here together that he would consider Secretary Austin's concerns. In fact, he said, and I quote, that he can't wait to read it, but he would not budge in the meantime. So I'm here this evening to place into the record Secretary Austin's reply. In his letter, the secretary makes his concerns clear. He explains how the actions of the senator from Alabama pose a grave threat to national security by harming military readiness. The secretary also explains how the senator from Alabama harms military families. I sincerely hope that the unvarnished assessment of our Secretary of Defense will be enough to move the senator from Alabama to lift his hold and let these nominations go forward. Here is Secretary Austin's letter in full, which I ask to have it placed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I am here today to ask my colleague from Alabama to let these promotions move forward and to find other ways to continue advocating for the policy changes that he wants to see. I am hopeful that he will do the right thing and allow these service members to carry out their responsibilities to our country. In a moment, I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 204. This nominee is a native of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. If confirmed, he would be the Navy's next sub-boss, making him the most senior operational submariner in the Navy. The submarine force is integral to deterring our enemies and keeping America safe. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 204, that the Senate vote on the nomination without intervening action or debate, that, if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that any statements related to the nomination be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Alabama.
reserving the right to object, I continue to reiterate my stance and my position over the last almost 4 months now about my opposition to this policy. Now, the burden is not on me to pass legislation to stop this illegal policy. The burden is on the administration. The burden is on the administration to stop breaking the law. And so let me just say this one more time, because I keep getting asked the same question over and over again. I will keep my hold. I will keep it on until the Pentagon follows the law or changes the law. It's that simple. Those are the two conditions that would get me to drop the hold. So until these conditions are met, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, let's be clear what is at issue here. Service members and their families don't get to decide where they serve. The policy that is at issue here allows service members who need reproductive health care to request time to travel to receive the treatment that they need. The treatment could be an abortion, but it also could be IVF. It also could be helping a service member or a family member receive treatment after a miscarriage. Commanders respect service members' privacy, and they don't want to be required to ask why the service member is taking leave. Now, I understand that the senator from Alabama doesn't like that. He doesn't think that the department should be facilitating certain types of reproductive health care in any way. The administration, let us be clear, is not breaking the law. Chairman Reed has already gone through all of the legal precedent and the legal opinion that states that what the Department of Defense is doing is absolutely within its purview. The Department of Defense is following the law. I understand that the law could be changed, and the senator from Alabama can advocate for the bill that he co-sponsors that would ban the department from providing paid leave or transportation to access legal reproductive care. Now, I think that such a policy would have terrible impact for the privacy of our service members and their families, who would have to tell their commanding officers intimate details of their medical situation in order to get the time they need to seek care for things like IVF or a miscarriage. It could prevent service members or their families from accessing important legal care that would require them to travel or take time away from work. It would also have negative impacts on our commanding officers who'd spend less time training against our national security threats and more time asking invasive questions about their employees' health conditions or those of the employees' families. Even so, the senator from Alabama is free to advocate for this policy. As I've said before, the senator does not have the votes in Congress for a bill like that. I think the senator from Alabama knows that, which is why he has taken this radical step of opposing swift passage of every high-level military nomination pending before the Senate. This approach is dangerous. Many of us are frustrated by executive branch policies and actions, but that frustration is not an excuse to endanger our national security and deprive service members of the leaders they need. The senator from Alabama and I fundamentally disagree on the issue of abortion and on DOD's policies, but we should all be able to agree that a blockade of the promotion of every senior member of our nation's military creates unacceptable risks to our national security. In a moment, I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 192. If confirmed, this nominee would be the first female superintendent for the Naval Academy. Of course, she is no stranger to breaking down barriers. She was also the first Hispanic woman to command a Navy warship. We are in the middle of a recruiting crisis. She is precisely the kind of leader we need to inspire our next generation to serve. I'd like to yield to the senator from Rhode Island, and then I will make my motion.
Mr. President,
Senator from Rhode Island.
I just want to reiterate what Senator Warren pointed out. This policy is not illegal. It has been fully justified by the Department of Justice, by interpretations of the many different agencies. In fact, one of the excruciating ironies here is Senator Tuberville is denying promotions to general officers because he will not allow female members of the military forces to have some of the same protections federal prisoners have. If that's not absurd, I don't know what is. Also, I've had the opportunity, really the privilege, to serve and command a paratroop company, have a lot of friends who made careers in the United States military. You get to the level of a colonel about to be promoted to brigadier general. It's a great honor. You've worked your whole life for it. You very much want to do that. But you have family responsibilities. You have other responsibilities. And I can pretty much assure you, most people who are qualified to be brigadier generals in the Army are being courted assiduously by companies to work for several $100,000 a year. And the longer this goes on, the more the demands of family, the more the uncertainty, the more the frustration, we will lose these talented people at a moment in our history where we need the leadership to assist our Ukrainian allies and also to confront a very serious threat across the Indo-Pacific at a time when the practice of warfare is changing second by second with technology. When you have the proponents of AI warning us this week that AI could be a catastrophic destruction of our species, well, guess where that's going to be first manifested? In a military dimension, I believe. And that requires leaders of character, intelligence, and compassion, dedication to democracy. And those leaders now are questioning whether they can continue because of an attempt to suggest that this is not legal, which is wrong, and ironically, again, to take away federal support for women who serve in the military of the United States that we extend to federal prisoners. And I yield back.
Thank you. And thank you for underscoring the point that this is not...
Senator from Massachusetts recognized.
That this is not, that the Department of Defense is not breaking the law. There is legal precedence for what the department is doing, and has been reviewed by the Department of Justice that the Department of Defense is fully in accord with current law. And with that, I would like to go back to the nominee who would be the first female superintendent of the Naval Academy. Mr. President, I renew my request with respect to calendar number 192.
Is there objection?
Mr. President?
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, let's talk about a few things. First of all, we heard talk of clear legal authority, clear legal precedent. I wasn't here when the distinguished senator from Rhode Island was providing that, but my understanding of it is that he's making the claim that there are judicial precedents for this, and at least one of the cases he cited was from 1981. Significantly, that's a full 3 years before 10 U.S.C. Section 1093 was even enacted into law. Talk about excruciating ironies. That was enacted into law as part of the Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1985. And it was voted on by, among others, then Senator Joe Biden. He voted for it. So whatever 1981 case you're citing, I don't know, but I'm certain that it couldn't have involved 10 U.S.C. Section 1093, the very statute that we're dealing with here, because it did not yet exist. I'm equally certain that whatever personnel within the Department of Justice that blessed this, whatever lawyers within the Department of Defense that blessed this, are also part of the Biden administration, ultimately are serving at the pleasure of the president. So I wouldn't expect that they would come back with an answer that he didn't want, because he and his administration have made clear that this is an all-of-government approach to make sure that the more abortions, the better, in the wake of Dobbs. So I find it impossible to believe that any court could have addressed this particular issue Setting aside whether that 1981 judicial precedent that he cited, that I haven't seen, is the only one. Let's assume that there were others. If there were others, there couldn't have been others, even if they were decided after this was enacted into law in 1984 as part of the Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1985. Because this policy didn't exist. No, policy didn't exist until just a couple of months ago. So it couldn't have come up. Courts don't answer these questions in the abstract. Under Article 3 of the Constitution, the courts are empowered only to resolve cases and controversies. The case and controversy requirement of Article 3 means that you've got to have standing. To have standing, you've got to have an injury, in fact, fairly traceable to the conduct of the defendant that is subject to being remedied by a competent authority of a court. That would have been lacking here, because until just a couple of months ago, this did not exist. They could not have addressed this. So I'm not sure what authorities the Department of Justice officials to whom my colleagues are referring were relying on, but it's not a ripe controversy that could have been capably adjudicated. But yeah, this is truly full of excruciating ironies. The fact that the same president who voted to support 10 U.S.C. Section 1093, which unmistakably makes clear that we don't want Department of Defense funding going to perform abortions. No, they rely on this argument that is reminiscent of Pinocchio in the movie Shrek 3. I think it was technically called Shrek the Third. Pinocchio in that movie gets away with all kinds of things by speaking in a form of legalese that would make any lawyer blush. It wouldn't be entirely untrue if I didn't say that I weren't entirely not opposed to this non-policy. Confuses people. That's sort of what they're doing here. Now, look, if you want to make the argument that this is legal, first of all, I don't agree with it. This violates at least the spirit, if not also the letter of the law. And even to the extent that it is somehow compliant with the letter of the law, to a point that I'm not willing to concede, because this is, in fact, funding the process of getting abortions. This is, in fact, funding the endeavor of an abortion, something that we go out of our way in American law to do. This is one of the things that unites Americans of different political backgrounds, of different party affiliations, regardless of how you feel about abortion and under what circumstances it should or shouldn't be legal. Americans are overwhelmingly united behind the concept that we shouldn't use U.S. taxpayer dollars, thus forcing the American people at the point of the gun, because ultimately when you pay your taxes, you're paying at the point of the gun, because if you don't pay your taxes, people with guns are going to show up and make you pay. We don't force people at the point of a gun to fund abortions, because we fundamentally recognize that's wrong, regardless of how any individual feels about abortion themselves. But this comparison is too cute by half. The very best I can say of it is to analogize it this way. If you really want to park in that handicapped spot that's reserved for persons with disabilities, and you're annoyed that it's there, so you park right up next to it, thus rendering it unusable space within the actual handicapped spot. That's the best I can analogize this to. To whatever extent you're complying with the letter of the law, and I don't concede that you are, because I don't think you are, you're still really messing with the underlying purpose of the bill. As to the point made moments ago by my colleague from Massachusetts, a distinguished lawyer, Harvard law professor herself, that this somehow is lawful because Department of Justice lawyers said that it's lawful. This is the same Department of Justice that has from time to time made mistakes, and I'm understating that quite significantly here. This is, in any event, a clear affront to the men and women who elected each of us. These laws are policy changes. Yes, they saw the need for a policy change in 1984 when they adopted the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1985. They understood that to put that in place, they couldn't just rely on Department of Defense policy. They needed to put it in statute, so they enacted a statute to do that. This flies in the face of that. You're actively promoting, encouraging, and facilitating the performance of abortions. And make no mistake, don't think of this as an even-handed approach, one that aims broadly to facilitate reproductive care. No, the American people are not stupid. They cannot be fooled. We certainly must not be here. This is about Dobbs. This is about their disagreement, their fundamental rejection of Dobbs. This is about their fundamental disagreement and rejection of the notion that the U.S. Constitution doesn't give this authority over abortion to unelected judges who sit across the street in the Supreme Court of the United States. And it was never a constitutional principle to begin with. The Constitution doesn't address it. They disagree with that. I get it. But it's their disagreement about this that prompted this policy. They've been unmistakably clear about that. Look, at the end of the day, this is a policy change. Policy changes need to be made by Congress. Policy changes that involve a departure from the policy established in statute in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1985, which remains legally binding and in effect to this very moment. If they want to get that changed, it is not incumbent upon those who oppose this policy to get the statute changed. It's those who want this policy to go into effect. And so I return to my long-used refrain. If Secretary Austin wants to make policy, he should run for the Senate. He can't set this kind of policy from the E-ring of the Pentagon. It's wrong. As to the points about military readiness, look, I don't think there's anyone more concerned about military readiness than my colleague from Alabama. He sits on the Armed Services Committee. He's a faithful member of that committee. He performs his oversight responsibilities very faithfully, very conscientiously. Nobody's more concerned about military readiness than Senator Tommy Tuberville. No one. But to whatever extent this impinges upon military readiness, the fact that he's got concerns with this and is therefore raising objections, that door swings both ways. If anything, it cuts stronger in the opposite direction. To the extent this is interfering with military readiness, then we should set down this policy right now. Allow Congress to decide this in connection with the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2024, which we'll be turning to in the coming weeks and months. Let's let Congress decide that. And in the meantime, set aside this policy that is a departure, a clear violation of at least the spirit, if not also the letter of the law, and let that be decided. If, in fact, this interferes with military readiness, let's put this down and not allow American national security to be impaired by that. Now, I don't believe we're in that position. I believe that while it's ideal for us to be able to move these nominees forward and get them moved, it's also very legitimate for a United States Senator to identify a problem, a simple problem arising out of the fact that the Department of Defense has got a couple of things that it wants to get done. It wants to get these people confirmed so that they can be promoted. And it also wants to put in place a policy. And it wants to do both at the same time. Senator Tuberville won't, and in fact, Senator Tuberville can't. He physically, under the rules of the United States Senate, he cannot. He is physically unable to stop them from confirming these people. There are ways of going about it. It's just time-consuming to do it without his assent. So they want a shortcut, and they're asking for him to do them a favor that's unreciprocated. Not just unreciprocated, but a favor that he warned them he would not give them if they took this unfortunate step. He did that, I think, back in December. So, knowing that as they did, they incurred this risk. To whatever degree they're right that this impacts military readiness at the expense of American national security, this is on him. He knew it would have this effect, and now he wants to force Senator Tuberville, shame him into doing him a favor by expediting this process so that the Senate won't have to go through the additional steps that the Senate will have to go through in order to get these people confirmed without Senator Tuberville relinquishing it. That is a shameful strategy on the Secretary of Defense. And he should be ashamed of the fact that he's become a policymaker. You can't legislate from the E-ring of the Pentagon. He has no business doing that here. He is thwarting, he is desecrating, he is disrespecting this institution and the sacred laws of our country, passed with really good reasons, in order for him to promote his own woke policy agenda. Shame on him for doing that. I object, Mr. President.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President?
Senator from Rhode Island.
Well, first, anyone who suggests that the Secretary of Defense does not have a role, in fact, a responsibility to shape policy at the Department of Defense It's nonsense, and I would suspect this person has never really served in the military forces of the United States. This is a policy that the Secretary of Defense is not only legally entitled, but is, I think, compelled to clarify the position of the Department of Defense when it comes to this Dobbs decision and its effect on military. Now, the gentleman from Utah did not hear my opening remarks. I did not refer to judicial decisions. I was referring to opinions, very valid opinions of the Department of Justice. Section 1093, he cites, is the most significant provision of the law. What it does, it prevents funding to perform abortions and restricts the use of the Department of Defense medical facilities to perform an abortion, except when the life of the mother is in danger in a case of rape or incest. And I might suggest that I think my colleagues over there wouldn't even recognize that part of the law, but that is part of the law. There is no discussion of other aspects, i.e. providing transportation, which I pointed out, federal prisons provide transportation. These are policy decisions that were relegated to the Secretary of Defense. Same types of decisions he has to make every day. What are the physical standards for troops in the United States military? Is that an act of Congress? No. I don't think anyone here would reasonably argue that we are the experts and should decide that, and we know better than the Secretary of Defense. A whole bevy of reasons. But 1093 is the key statute, and it prevents non-covered abortions from being conducted in military regulations by the Department of Defense. It has no comments whatsoever in terms of any other aspects. The Department's policy is legal, as I pointed out. It's rooted in longstanding Department of Justice interpretations of both the Hyde Amendment and similar restrictions. In fact, the Department of Defense General Counsel requested the Justice Department views on this policy last fall because they wanted to be sure they were right before they went ahead. And they issued a lengthy and informative slip opinion, which is part of the record. And they concluded that 10 United States Code Section 1093, which my colleague from Utah continually refers to, does not bar the department from using appropriated funds to pay for service members and their dependents to travel to obtain abortions that the department cannot fund directly because of Section 1093. So this is not illegal. And what is contemptuous, I think, of the Senate is not this debate over this policy, that's what we do, is ignoring years and years and years of respecting the promotion of military officers by the Department of Defense based on merit, based on their abilities, not their politics, and for the first time, using military officers as political tokens in a political game of trying to change things that they don't like, even though these policies are absolutely legal, have been confirmed by the Department of Justice, and provide, I think, benefits that, as I pointed out, that in transportation we provide to federal prisoners. I would hate to see our soldiers, our female soldiers particularly, treated any less appropriately than federal prisoners. So this argument is a lot of, Sturm und Drang, I think is the German pronunciation for it. The policy is legal. One other point, sort of simple-minded point, if it's not legal, why hasn't it been challenged in court? Because it's legal. Now, you could disagree with the policy, and many of my colleagues do. In fact, many of our colleagues have submitted legislation, and that legislation will be considered at some point, but no one has risen to the point of invoking this block on military people. It affects the military, it affects families, it affects our readiness, it affects our recruitment, if people look far enough down the road, and every day it is still held, it does more and more damage. It's a cumulative effect. And I am very, very strongly objecting to the continued, really, decapitation of our military. Let's carry this forward for 6 months, a year. We don't have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I think we will, because I think the majority of my colleagues understand how important it is to have that, but it won't be done in an efficient, coordinated way. It'll be objected to. It'll be argued about. Commandant of the Marine Corps. No, got to put this gentleman, General Smith, to the ringer. The Chief of Staff of the Army, same way. We are in a situation where we are in tremendous pressure globally, assisting the Ukrainians in their battle, protecting a new peer competition with China, trying to assimilate the technology that is changing the battlefield every second, literally. And now we're spending time arguing about what is within the legal authority of the Secretary of Defense, and doing it by taking military officers and making them political tokens that you're trying to trade for something. I personally resent such treatment of professional officers in our military.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, the senator from Alabama earlier claimed that the Department of Defense's policy violates the law. The senator from Utah then made a slight shift in how he described his complaint with the Department of Defense policy. He said it violates the spirit, if not the letter, of the law. And therein lies the difference. The law that we're talking about here is the Hyde Amendment, and that is a congressional prohibition on the federal government paying for abortions. Let's be clear about the Department of Defense policy. Service members remain personally responsible for bearing the medical costs of abortion, just like they did before the Dodd's opinion, just like they did the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, all the way back to when the Hyde Amendment was passed. Instead, what DoD policy does is clarify that service members who need to travel out of state to access any kind of reproductive health care that is not available where they are stationed can request the time off to go get that care for themselves or a family member. That's it. That's what people in the Peace Corps can do. That's what people in federal prisons can do. And that's what our service members can do. That is not a violation of the explicit language in the Hyde Amendment. And to stand up and claim that somehow what the Department of Defense has done is violate the law is simply not to read the law. The law is clear, and the Department of Defense continues to follow it. But there are real consequences to this argument. I understand that there are members of the Republican Party, members of the Senate, who would like to change that policy. They would like for the Department of Defense to follow a different policy. They can try to change the law. They can introduce an amendment. In fact, they already have introduced an amendment. But in the meantime, they cannot hold hostage the promotions of our top military leaders. This jeopardizes our national defense. Secretary Austin's letter that I earlier entered into the record goes into great detail about how these holds that the senator from Alabama has put on our top military leaders create mission vacancies that, quote, incur an unnecessary and unprecedented degree of risk at a moment when our adversaries may seek to test our resolve. He goes on to explain that the holds undermine power projection abroad, which, quote, diminishes our global standing as the strongest military in the world, which is in large part based on our stable processes and orderly transitions, precisely what the senator from Alabama is holding up. The risks are even greater in new domains of potential conflict, and Secretary Austin does not mince words on who benefits. Who benefits? Our Secretary of Defense identifies them: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and ISIS. The leaders whose nominations currently stand in purgatory are responsible, according to Secretary Austin, for, quote, executing strategy, acquiring new technologies, enhancing tactical effectiveness, conducting joint training, and strengthening global alliances. This isn't rhetoric. These are specific examples of U.S. national security interests that are endangered by these reckless holds. I understand that the senator from Alabama may not be persuaded by Secretary Austin's letter, but we have to face reality here. While we argue over the appropriate, over the fact that the Republicans want to change current law under the Hyde Amendment, we are endangering our national defense. We need to move forward on the nominations that have already been approved by the service members, by the White House, by our own committee. In the Senate Armed Services Committee, we need a vote so that these people can move to their next posts and do their jobs. In a moment, I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 199. If confirmed, this nominee would be Deputy Commander for Air Force Materiel Command, which employs nearly 86,000 military and civilian airmen and manages a $71.3 billion budget. She is also a mama. She calls her kids the Three Musketeers and says they are the center of her universe. These holds are the hardest on military families who are trying to figure out how to sign up for new schools, trying to establish their lives in their next deployment. This nominee has already moved 17 times during her career, and she is now held by the senator from Alabama, cannot move to her next deployment, cannot establish herself and her Three Musketeers, get them settled in school, get her family in the place where they will be so that she can do her job for the American people. We need people with decades of logistics management experience, and we need to treat them with some respect. Mr. President, I renew my request with respect to calendar number 199.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I rise today to support my friend, my colleague, Senator Tommy Tuberville, as he continues to do the right thing, to do justice, as he continues his fight against the radical pro-abortion policies put in place by the Defense Department earlier this year. And I remind everybody, this is a fight the Department of Defense picked. We didn't pick this fight, they picked this fight. They're the ones that decided to change their policies to break the law. This February 16th policy provides military personnel 3 weeks of paid leave and uses taxpayer dollars for travel expenses incurred while seeking an abortion. Clear violation of the Hyde Amendment. The policy is illegal. It violates federal law prohibiting funds to the DOD from being used to perform abortions except where the life of the mother is endangered, rape, or incest. This policy takes the number of the Department of Defense abortions from less than 20 per year to an estimated 4,500 abortions. The policy also describes abortion as reproductive health care. And I think that's the true issue here. You know, as an obstetrician, I'm often asked, two questions. When does life begin? And what was the favorite part of a pregnancy for me? I want to talk about the pregnancy for a second. I took care of hundreds, maybe thousands of infertile couples, and certainly that first time when they had a pregnancy test was positive was a great moment for me to share with them. 4 weeks after conception, we could see a baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound. Another spectacular moment for every couple to see that little baby's heartbeat at 4 weeks after conception. At 12 weeks, we could hear the baby's heartbeat on a Doppler. And it was one of the favorite moments for that mom and dad to hear that baby's heartbeat as well, especially those women that had recurrent miscarriages, those ones who had lost life early repeatedly. And through miracles and medicines, they were able to conceive and carry that pregnancy. They get through the first trimester, they hear the baby's heartbeat, they know they're pretty much out of the woods. One of my favorite visits, though, came at about 15 to 16 weeks after conception. And the mom would come into my office and I would ask her, how are you feeling? And the nausea and vomiting's now over with. And I'd ask her, are you feeling the baby move yet? And her eyes would light up. And she'd say, yes, doctor, I can feel the baby move now. Isn't that incredible? So I always loved that. And maybe the next visit, maybe at 18, 20 weeks along, they'd come into the room and I would examine the mom and put my hands on her abdomen. I could feel the baby's head and the baby's buttocks and maybe the limbs. And I would see the baby kind of start to move as I would kind of push on one spot. And maybe there was a little brother or a sister in the room as well. And I'd listen to the heartbeat. And almost every time that brother or sister would screech out, Mommy, is that my baby brother or sister? This is at 18 weeks. And then what was the miraculous of all this was that little baby, that fetus, the baby inside the mom, the unborn baby, you could hear the heartbeat increase. You could hear it increase in intensity and the rate, recognizing its baby brother or sister's voice. The rest of the pregnancy, maybe there was another 6 or 8 visits, and they were all fun and they were all special. I delivered a baby most every day of my life for 25 years. And every labor was different. It was touching. It was hard. It was easy. All those things. We had prolapsed cords, placentas separate, women with blood pressure problems seizing. I was blessed. I never lost a mom. Never lost a mom. God blessed us and gave me the skill to get them through that. Some labors were short and some were long. Some lasted 30 minutes and some lasted 2 days. Sometimes they would push for 2 minutes and sometimes a woman would push for 3 hours. But my favorite moment of every pregnancy was delivering the baby and watching it, rubbing it down, and I'd be checking its pulse and its heart rate and see is it breathing and making sure it was dry and quietly praying to myself for this newborn baby until I heard it start crying. And the favorite moment was giving that newborn baby to that mom and just watching her and observe her and just being able to watch that total non-judgmental love of a mom for a newborn baby. I take it backwards from there and talk about when his life begins. There are those people in this Congress that even after a baby that would survive abortion, they think that baby should not be treated and cared for. Certainly, I believe life, certainly it begins if the baby survives an abortion and it's past the point of viability. We should do everything we could to help that baby out. You go backwards, viability probably 20, 21 weeks probably today. Does life begin at 21 weeks? If that baby was born outside the womb, would it survive? At 21 weeks, it has a chance. I think most of us would agree that life certainly begins by then. What about at 18 weeks when that baby recognizes its brother or sister's voice? Or at 16 weeks when mom can feel the baby move, or at 12 weeks when we can hear the heartbeat, or at 6 weeks when we can see the heartbeat. Well, after years of study and doing this, my heart tells me life begins at conception. And no one's been able to prove me wrong. I think we have to assume life begins at conception. And that's why it's so struggling for me to hear people call an abortion as reproductive health care. Reproductive health care to me means helping patients who can't conceive, helping moms to have a healthy pregnancy, getting them taking folic acid a year before they're trying to conceive, making sure they're doing everything they can to prevent spina bifida or anencephalic babies, getting their sugars under control, all those things. That's what reproductive health care means to me, not taking the life of a baby. Labeling abortion as health care is a tactic that's used to avert the radical agenda, the radical abortion agenda. This irreversible and unethical scheme politicizes our doctors' offices, and in almost all cases, it does not improve women's health. I'm sorely disappointed in the military that I once served in, that my dad served, my brother served, my uncles served, my great-uncles, my mom's dad, my mom's uncle who died in World War II, my son who's now serving. I'm disappointed in the military. It's turned its attention and resources to terminating life. I want to remind the Department of Defense that they exist to protect the citizens of this great nation, not to push a radical abortion agenda. That they took an oath to the Constitution to defend this country. Why are they picking this fight to end the lives of unborn babies? It's morally wrong, it's illegal, and the Pentagon needs to be held accountable. The Biden administration has created the most politicized Pentagon in history, destroying their own morale, destroying recruiting, destroying the readiness of our military. Unelected bureaucrats cannot ignore Congress and change the law with a memo. The policy is outside of the Department of Defense's mission to uphold and fight for life, not destroy it. I'm honored to stand up here and support my colleague, Senator Tuberville, to fight back against this outrageous abortion policy, both in the name of protecting life, ensuring that our military uses resources to protect our homeland and our interests abroad. The policy is wrong. The DOD's policy is wrong until the military gets back to providing for our common defense and out of the business of providing abortions. I'm proud to stand with Senator Tuberville. Mr. President, Mrs. President, Miss President, therefore I object and I yield back.
The objection is heard.
Madam President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, the Department of Defense has adopted a healthcare policy that is both legal and necessary to protect the readiness of our forces. It also protects our national defense. These policies were also reviewed by the Department of Justice. The prohibition to which my colleagues refer is the prohibition in the Hyde Amendment of using federal dollars to pay for abortions. Let me say this as clearly as I can. Under the Department of Defense's policy, service members remain personally responsible for bearing the medical cost of abortion. That is true today. It is true last week. It was true the day after the Dodd opinion. It was true the day before the Dodd opinion. And for years, that has been the policy. What has changed is that the DOD has clarified that service members who need to travel out of state to access any kind of reproductive health care that is not available where they are stationed. And what kind of health care might not be available? It might be abortion care, it might be IVF, it might be care for someone who has suffered a miscarriage. That any person who has suffered that personally or someone in their family can request time off to go get that care for themselves or for a family member. That's it. That's all we're talking about here. Service members do not get to decide where to serve. I am proud to support the DoD in saying that a change in station should not mean a change in your basic rights. I appreciate that my colleagues have strong views on abortion. So do I. We are not going to agree on that. But all of us should be able to agree that we should not take steps that harm the people who volunteer to serve in our military. That if they need care that they cannot get in the state where they are, they should have an opportunity to go somewhere else. That's it. There is no prohibition in law. There is no Hyde Amendment violation here. Instead, what we've got is wholesale holding up the nominations of more than 200 of our top military leaders who cannot advance to the posts that they have been thoroughly vetted and are ready to be promoted into, cannot advance to their duty stations, cannot settle their families in their next assignments, cannot receive the increase in their pay that they are entitled to. So in a moment, I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 90. This is the person who would be America's military representative to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but is currently being held up by the senator from Alabama. I'll be asking for the Senate to confirm calendar number 94. Collectively, these are 37 nominees who have served in the Army for nearly 1,000 years. I'll be asking for the Senate to confirm calendar number 84. This nominee would command the 5th Fleet, which operates in the Middle East. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 49. This is the man who was the Chief of Staff for Operation Warp Speed, one of the greatest achievements of the Trump administration to rapidly develop, test, and distribute life-saving COVID vaccines. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 82. These 27 Air Force nominees have collectively served their country for over 600 years. One of them, in fact, is a NASA astronaut who received his master's degree from MIT and commanded NASA's third longest duration commercial crew mission. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 47. This nominee would be commanding general for the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command and U.S. Army Forces Strategic Command. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 97. Collectively, these 16 nominees have served in the Navy for more than 400 years. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 46. This nominee studied at the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama and currently serves as commander of the 10th Medical Group and command surgeon for the United States Air Force Academy. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 83. This nominee studied at the Squadron Officer School at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and she is now capable and ready to serve as the Chief of Staff for Air Mobility Command at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 48. She would serve as Deputy Chief of Staff for the Army's G4, which is responsible for the Army's strategy, policy plans, and programming for logistics and sustainment. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 50. Collectively, these two women have served in the Army for over 60 years. They deserve to be promoted. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 51. This man would serve as Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration for the Air Force. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 52. This nominee would be the Military Deputy and Director for the Army Acquisition Corps. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 86. Collectively, these 11 nominees have over 275 years of service in the Air Force. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 87. These two nominees have served the Air Force for over 55 years. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 88. These 10 nominees have served over 288 years. Together, they have nearly 20,000 flying hours of experience. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 89. This nominee is currently commanding the largest Army command in the Caribbean. And I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 91. This nominee is currently serving in Birmingham, Alabama as Chief of Staff to the United States Army Reserve Deployment Support Command. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 92. This nominee is currently the Director for Joint Reserve Intelligence Support Element for Europe and Eurasia for the Defense Intelligence Agency, helping to make sure that Ukraine and our allies in Europe have the critical national security information they need so that they can compete on the battlefield. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 93. This nominee is currently the Deputy Commander for Support, providing security assistance to Ukraine. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 95. Collectively, these 8 nominees have served in the Marine Corps for over 200 years. They deserve their promotions. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 96. These nominees have served in the Navy for over 55 years. Both are currently serving in the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, making them responsible for the health and safety of our sailors, Marines, and their families. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 98. Collectively, these 2 nominees have served in the Navy for 55 years. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 99. These 2 have collectively served in the Navy for over 60 years, managing major weapons systems programs. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 100. This nominee is currently serving as the Director of Health and Training at the Defense Health Agency, and he is recognized as a diplomat of the American Board of General Dentistry. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 101. This nominee will be the commander of Naval Supply Systems Command, which makes sure that the Navy has everything they need all around the world. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 102. These 13 nominees collectively served in the Navy for over 400 years. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 103. This nominee is currently serving as the Executive Assistant for the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need people like this. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 104. These 2 nominees have collectively served the Navy for over 55 years, one currently serving as Information Warfare Commander. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 105. These 4 nominees have collectively served the Navy for over 100 years. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 106. These 2 nominees have served the Air Force for over 65 years. One of these nominees earned her nursing degree at Boston College and rose to become the chief nurse of the entire Air Force. She deserves her promotion. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 107, currently serving as the commanding general for the Marine Corps forces in Japan. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 110. Collectively, these 23 nominees have over 620 years of service to the Air Force. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 111. This nominee would be the Deputy Commandant for Aviation for the Marine Corps, who advises the Marine Corps top officer on all aviation matters. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 205. This nominee would be the commander of the 2nd Fleet and Joint Forces Command Norfolk, the only operational NATO command in North America, responsible for the North Atlantic and the Arctic. We need capable leaders like this. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 203. This pilot has flown more than 3,000 hours in the F-16 and the F-35. We need capable people like this. In a moment, I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 202. This nominee would be the director of the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 201. This nominee is an experienced information warfare officer. We need him in his post. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 200. This nominee is someone you can count on in a crisis. A native of San Juan, he was there to help his fellow Puerto Ricans after the earthquakes forced 7,500 people to leave their homes. He has stepped up and stepped up again for people who need him. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 198. This nominee would be the commander of Air Combat Command, which is the primary provider of air combat forces to U.S. warfighting commands all around the world. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 197. This nominee would be the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for warfighting requirements and capabilities. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 196. He would be the Deputy Commander for U.S. Central Command. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 195. He's logged more than 500 carrier-assisted landings and 2,800 flight hours in tactical aircraft. We need him. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 194. This nominee from Falmouth, Massachusetts, if confirmed, will be the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, which is responsible for training and providing combat-ready Navy forces wherever combatant commanders need them, and we need him. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 193. This nominee would be the Commander for Naval Surface Forces and Commander Naval Surface Forces U.S. Pacific Fleet, where his mission will be to make sure that the Navy has every capability we need for a force that is balanced, affordable, and resilient. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 191. This nominee would be the Commanding General for the Marine Expeditionary Force and U.S. Marine Corps Forces Japan. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 190. This nominee would be Deputy Commanding General for Futures and Concepts at Army Futures Command. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 188. This nominee would be Commander of Pacific Air Forces, which integrates air, space, and cyberspace capabilities to keep the Indo-Pacific open and free. He's flown more than 4,000 flight hours and previously served as the commander for U.S. forces in Japan. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 189. As a leader, she sees that our power as a nation comes from our moral strength and standing up for what we know as right. This nominee would be Pacific Air Force's Deputy Commander, making her the number 2 for the nominee that I just spoke about. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 187. If confirmed, this nominee would be Deputy Commander of U.S. Forces Korea and the Commander of the 7th Air Force. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 186. This nominee would be Deputy Chief of Staff for Air Force's Future, which is charged with representing the voice of tomorrow's airmen to be ready to defeat any future threats and capabilities our enemies wield. We need this person. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 185. If confirmed, this nominee would be Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, making him the primary military advisor for everything the Air Force buys to keep us safe. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 184. This nominee took his first flight at 2 weeks old, and became a command pilot with more than 2,500 flying hours. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar numbers 182 and 183. This nominee will be the next Navy Surgeon General, making him the principal advisor to the Secretary of the Navy on medical matters. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 181. During his service, he has accumulated over 5,000 flight hours and over 1,100 carrier-assisted landing. He was a Top Gun instructor and later the commander for Naval Aviation Warfighting Development Center. He is entitled to his promotion. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 180. This nominee is also a Top Gun graduate, completing 8 carrier deployments in the Western Pacific, North Atlantic, Mediterranean, and North Arabian Sea. I'll be asking the Senate to confirm calendar number 112. He would be the director of the Defense Contract Management Agency, which manages 225,000 contracts valued at more than $3.5 trillion at 15,000 contractor locations worldwide. I don't know what to say, except that we have more than 200 people here who have dedicated their lives to the United States. They have volunteered for military service. They are all career. They are in it all the way. They are capable. They are talented. They serve our country. And right now, they have become the political football for the senator from Alabama. And that is wrong. These people deserve their promotions. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect for the work that they have put in for our nation. It is the least that we can do for them, that we can do for their families, and that we can do for the national security of the United States of America. We need these people. We don't need to tell them that we don't care about them. We need them. We need to retain them. We need to promote them. We need to use their talents. Madam President, I renew my request with respect to each of the calendar numbers that I have identified.
Is there objection? The senator from Alabama.
Reserving the right to object, my position continues to be either follow the law or change the law. For that reason, I object.
The objection is heard. Does the senator from Massachusetts yield?
I will yield to the senator from Utah.
The senator from Utah.
Madam President, I want to be very clear about a couple things. Number one, this is the law. It is not called the Hyde Amendment. There is a thing called the Hyde Amendment that applies elsewhere outside the military. The military, the Pentagon, has its own statutory provision. It's not the Hyde Amendment. It's 10 U.S.C. Section 1093, adopted in 1984 as part of the Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 1985. It's been the law ever since then. You can't use Pentagon money for this purpose, nor can you use Pentagon facilities for this purpose. It's saying that you're not doing that, even though you're paying people, giving them 3 weeks of paid leave time and paying all their travel expenses and their per diem in order to do this. That is openly flouting the spirit of the law, if not also the letter, in order to circumvent it. And again, I'll go back to the analogy I used earlier. You go up to a parking space thinking you want to park there, but it's a handicapped space. It's reserved for persons with disabilities. You don't have the disability symbol on your car, so you park next to it. But you park deliberately so close to the line that you render that spot unusable for anyone with disabilities who should need access to it. Still has the same effect because you're openly flouting the law. You're doing it in a deliberate attempt to cause the very same harms that that particular law was designed to prevent. Now, this is a policy choice, and it's the policy choice that Congress deliberately took away from the Department of Defense, deliberately took out of the hands of the Secretary of Defense. He's seized that back. Senator Tuberville saw this coming back in December. He told Secretary Austin in no uncertain terms, you should not do this. This would be in violation of the law, and if you do this, there are going to be problems, and I will no longer cooperate with you if you try to seek unanimous consent to facilitate the confirmation of these flag officer promotions. He made that really clear. Secretary Austin made his choice. The moment he decided to legislate from the E-ring of the Pentagon, he took on that risk, and now he has the audacity, through surrogates in the Senate, to come back to Senator Tuberville and say, I got what I wanted. I did so in violation of the law. I'm openly flouting the law, its spirit, if not also the letter. And I also want you to cooperate with me, Senator Tuberville. I want you to do what I say because that's more convenient for me. That's not fair. That's not lawful. It's not legal. It's not kosher. It's not cool. Look, the fact is, we could end this right now. I would love to end it right now. I can't speak for Senator Tuberville, but I have a sneaking suspicion. He'd well let these go right now. He'd let you get every one of these men and women confirmed this very moment if you take this thing off the table. But Secretary Austin took this hostage, took all of these men and women hostage the moment he did this, having been forewarned by Senator Tuberville. He can't now be heard to come back, having waived his right to do that, to come back and demand that Senator Tuberville be somehow shamed into cooperating, into facilitating it. Now, the other point here is they can still get these people confirmed, even without that compromise, which you could make tonight. You put this thing off the table, you stop trying to achieve this through extortion, he'll let them go right now. I'm 99.99% sure of that, and that's pretty confident from me. He'll do that right now. But even if you're not willing to do that, you could still get these people confirmed. You just don't want to do the hard work of doing it. It takes more time to do it without Senator Tuberville's full cooperation. So look, if you really are serious about end-strength readiness, then that's what you would do. That's what someone would do if they were worried about end-strength readiness. And let's talk about that for a minute. End-strength readiness shouldn't be confused with flag officer promotions. It's not where we see end-strength readiness with flag officer promotions. It doesn't mean these men and women aren't deserving of their promotions, or we wouldn't be willing and interested to see them confirmed so that they can have their promotions. But to say that it affects end-strength readiness disregards what flag officers are doing and the capacity they hold. Not aware of any reason why that would affect our end-strength readiness, nor am I aware of any compelling reason why without this policy that openly flouts the law, our military would suffer from an end-strength readiness problem. It's an absurd argument. In any event, it violates the law. They can't do this. It's the wrong branch of government. He doesn't have this power. He was forewarned, and he did the wrong thing anyway. We don't reward bad behavior that way. We certainly don't reward unlawful behavior. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the senator from Utah and the senator from Alabama have repeatedly said that the Department of Defense is somehow violating the law. Let's pull the statute out and just take a look at it. I want to read the words into the record. Under Part A, restriction on use of funds. Funds available to the Department of Defense may not be used to perform abortions except where the life of the mother would be endangered if the fetus were carried to term, or in a case in which the pregnancy is the result of an act of rape or incest, period. That's it. It does not say that funds from the Department of Defense may not be used for travel. It does not say that people may not have time off. It does not say that people may be allowed to travel out of state. It has exactly one thing that it prohibits federal funds from being used, and that is may not be used to perform abortions. Let me say again, as clearly as I know how, the Department of Defense's rule clearly states that the service member will pay for her own medical services. It will not be the case that the Department of Defense will pay for abortions. If the senator from Utah wants to change that law, he certainly can introduce an amendment to do that. The same for the senator from Alabama. But right now, the Department of Defense is following the law in the United States. The senator from Alabama's actions pose a grave threat to our national security and readiness. That is not just my view. It is the view of the Secretary of Defense and the former Secretaries of Defense serving in both Democratic and Republican administrations. If the senator from Alabama stays on this path, his actions will soon endanger the nomination of the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs, an action we have never seen in the history of our nation. We have 221 good people who have earned their promotions, who are ready to go to their next duty stations and serve their nation. They are being treated with disrespect, and this action is undermining our national defense. I urge the senator from Alabama to release his holds immediately and allow these senior military officers to receive the promotions that they have earned. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Utah.
Madam President, with great respect to my friend and colleague from Massachusetts, the Pentagon itself acknowledged that while military abortions have been counted, I think, in the range of 20 or 30 per year in the past, that this policy, which funds abortion, it just does, that number would increase to about 4,400, maybe 4,500 a year. The causation and the number was estimated by the Pentagon itself based on this subsidy. This is a subsidy for abortion. They are, in fact, subsidizing abortion. The fact that they have engineered in a way that they think gets them around the technicalities of the law should mean very little to us as policymakers, as lawmakers, for the fact that they're openly flouting the law. They're going through this trickery only because they don't like the law. They hate the fact that this became law, so they're trying to find a way to get around it. They are, in fact, funding abortion. That is what you do when you pay somebody to travel. You give them 3 weeks of paid leave to do something. When you fund their per diem so that you cover everything for that, you are funding abortion. If the only argument you're left with is we're not paying for the actual surgery itself, we're just paying for everything around it, when the value attached to the travel, to the per diem, to the paid leave time is a significant expense, an expense that I suspect in many, if not most instances, would well outpace the cost of the medical procedure itself. That's too cute by half. They are, in fact, funding abortion. That's what this does. It was done knowing, expecting, anticipating, and desiring that this would increase the number of abortions performed in the military every year to a significant degree. That's what they're doing, and it's wrong.
The senator from Massachusetts.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.